Well, good morning to those of you watching in North Tonawanda and Medina. Good morning to you as well. Today we're continuing a series we started last week, a series called Gratitude, because this is the time of year we think about gratitude a little bit more than normal, right? Just this past week we celebrated Veterans Day, which is a time where we pause and we give thanks and we reflect on the sacrifice and what people went through to serve our country and our nation in the military. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving, and can you believe it's already Thanksgiving? It feels like it should be the beginning of October still, but next Thursday is Thanksgiving. And the idea of Thanksgiving on a national level, it actually started on Thursday, November 26, 1789, when George Washington issued a proclamation that the entire country should observe Thanksgiving, a day of Thanksgiving. But it wasn't until 74 years later that Abraham Lincoln, he issued a proclamation that, and he encouraged Americans to recognize the last Thursday of November as a day of Thanksgiving. A few years later, Congress, they put into law, or they made it official that the nation of America would celebrate 4 holidays. And those 4 holidays that they made national holiday were Christmas, New Year's, Independence Day, and Thanksgiving. From the very beginning of our country, our leaders have recognized the importance and the value of gratitude. And it probably comes as no surprise that long before our leaders recognized the importance and value of gratitude, that God recognized the importance and the value. He placed a high level of importance on gratitude. And last week, Pastor Rick here in Akron, Pastor Jeanette in North Tonawanda, and Pastor Kevin in Medina, they talked about the story of Noah and the ark, and how the very first thing that Noah did when he came off the ark after over a year of being on this boat, the first act that he did was an act of gratitude. He built an altar out of worship and gratitude to God. See, from Genesis all throughout the Bible, we see gratitude as not only important, but as an act of worship to God. And we also see something else modeled for us in the Bible, something that kind of does the opposite, something that creates division, something that hardens our hearts, something that's potentially the most contagious thing to ever infect our world, something that drives us all nuts, yet we are all guilty of doing it. That is complaining. Or the word we'll use today, a word used a lot in the Bible, grumbling. I'll end up using those 2 words interchangeably today, and we'll talk about what a life full of complaining can do to our soul. But first, here's a few interesting thoughts I had on complaining or grumbling. The first one is this, is we dislike it in others, but we justify it when we do it. If I asked you to think of someone who grumbles a lot, you could probably think of someone in an instant. And chances are the thought of spending a lot of time with that person is a little exhausting, because complainers have a way of sucking the joy right out of us. It's a trait we don't necessarily like in other people, yet when we find ourselves doing it, it's so easy to justify, isn't it? And I think the reason is this, is number 2, is that grumbling, it takes the focus off the goodness of God and it puts it on ourselves. We become the center of the world when we complain. Our focus is us in our circumstances. It's us and our viewpoints, us and our opinion. People who grumble a lot, if you've noticed this, they tend to be in very one-sided friendships. It's not uncommon for the majority of conversations to be revolved around their life, and they might get a lot out of that friendship without giving anything in return. It's true, a self-centered person is a tough person to be in a close friendship with. The third thought is this, is that grumbling is contagious. I've had friends in the past that if I'm hanging out with them, I can go into that evening with a great attitude, and then I get caught up in their complaining. And I walk out of that evening with a poor attitude. If you've never noticed this before, next time you and a group of friends get together, or better yet, you and a group of coworkers get together, pay attention to how the conversation will shift as soon as someone begins to complain. it will spread like wildfire, and the entire conversation will end up to just grumbling about stuff. The fourth thought is that grumbling can be a revealer of something going on in our hearts. Our words, what comes out of our mouth, is directly connected to our hearts. Look at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 12. He says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." We speak what's an overflow of our hearts. So what can our heart be full of that leads to complaining? I wrote down a few. It could be things like discontentment. It could be things like pride, where, again, kind of back to that thing where we're the center of the universe. It could be things like envy, where we're envious of other people. It could be calls about your vehicle's extended warranty is about to expire. Causes us to complain. I think we're all justified with complaining about that one. And then the fifth thought is it's hard to see in ourselves, but it's easy to see in other people. I know for me, I can go all day complaining about something and not even realize that I'm doing it. But the moment someone else does it, we notice it. If you have kids, you know this to be true. I have this clip from a Christian comedian named Tim Hawkins that I want to show you, so watch this clip.
Kids, stop your whining. Stop your whining. There's just nothing to whine about. You got everything you need. I love my children, but not too long ago, I made them a breakfast. I made them a full, balanced breakfast. It was huge. I made everything for them. It took me like an hour and a half, I wanted to surprise them. So I made the breakfast. I put it all on the table. I wake up, kids, come to the breakfast table. I made you breakfast. All right. They sit down. I go into my office. 10 seconds later, I hear this. Ah! And what's wrong?
There's pulp in the orange juice. Pulp. You got the orange juice with pulp in it. Get it out.
Like, you get it out, man. I've seen you eat an orange. That's pretty much full pulp. If ever pulp in the milk, then tell me about it. That's not good. It's pretty much cottage cheese. You let Daddy know, and I'll take care of that. Pulp is like kryptonite to my kids, man. When I want to be alone, I just go in my office, I just put pulp on the doorknob. Daddy,
It burns.
Yeah. I took my kids a while back to this theme park called Six Flags. You ever heard of Six Flags? It's a real fun theme park, man. Took them there for a day. I spent $500,000. $500,000 in a day. We're driving home that night. I heard this in the back seat. Hey, sweetheart, what's wrong? Billy's daddy took them to Disney World. For a week.
And we just got to go to Six Flags.
For a day. We hate you. Sweetheart, look up here at Daddy. Jesus, take the wheel. You ever feel like doing that? I have. Like, we got insurance. Let's see what happens. I don't care anymore. I just don't want to hear that. How ungrateful is that? Disney World. Let's make a new theme park for kids. We'll call it Third World. Send them there for a few weeks. See if they don't come back a little more grateful. You know what I'm talking about? It's the third world after all. It's... Daddy, I want a Happy Meal. He'll be happy to get a meal, son. Daddy, Mickey Mouse. No, that's a giant rat. Get out of here! It's the third... Oh, it's a poison dart. I just got...
Aren't you happy you came to church today? You know what's true, though, is if Tim Hawkins brought his daughter to Disney World, you know what probably would have happened? She would have found something to complain about, because I've been to Disney World before, and you know what I hear a lot of is kids saying, oh, this line's too long, my feet hurt, like it's too hot out. And before you get too judgmental over kids, I mean, I've heard the parents too. I've heard you complain about the lines and the money and all that kind of stuff. Now, we see complaining all throughout the Bible. Even some of the heroes of the faith, people in the Bible that do extraordinary things, they were really good at complaining. They complain on a regular basis. And I don't think there's a better example of complainers than the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. They were just constantly complaining about something, nonstop grumbling. And I want to show you one of several examples in the Old Testament. Just to give you a little bit of background on the passage we're going to read today, this is what was happening for the nation of Israel. So for 430 years, longer than America's been a nation, the nation of Israel was in slavery in Egypt. And they were in bondage. They were treated poorly. They were forced to work all day, every day, no medical care. They were really treated no different than animals. And then God does some unbelievable miracles that lead the people of Israel to freedom. You might be familiar with the story of Moses and Pharaoh and the 10 plagues. Our pastors referenced it last week, the Passover, and how through a series of miracles, God causes Pharaoh to release the people of Israel and allow them to freely leave Egypt. After the people leave, Pharaoh quickly changes his mind, and he sends his army after Israel to bring them back, which begins another series of miracles. The first one being God parting the Red Sea to allow the Israelites to escape to safety. We'll talk a little bit more about this one in just a little bit. God also provided the Israelites clothes that never wore out and protected their feet from blisters for the entire journey. I always thought those two miracles were like really often overlooked. I mean, how amazing would it be for 40 years of travel to never have to get new clothes, never have blisters on your feet? I prayed for that one before at Disney World. God provided water for the people when there was no water, literally water from a rock. Another time they were at a body of water that was not drinkable, but God made the water drinkable for the Israelites. God fed the entire nation through a series of miracles, causing manna to miraculously appear every single day. He fed them through this miracle for 40 years. Over and over and over, God provided and he protected and he proved himself to his people. But the Israelites did exactly what I do and what so many of us do. In the middle of the blessings and the provisions of God, we complain. Look at this one example of their complaining in Exodus chapter 14. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt, by freeing us from slavery? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." This wasn't an isolated incident. Over and over, despite everything God had done for them, the people of Israel grumble. And look at how Moses responds at one point, because most of their complaining was directed at Moses. And in Exodus 16, Moses says to them, he says, "You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." He's saying, I know you think you're just complaining about us and to us, but what you're actually doing, whether you realize it or not, is you're complaining about God. So what if every time we complain, regardless of where we're directing the complaint, we're actually complaining against the Lord? See, here's the truth as we continue the series about gratitude, is that a grumbling heart is the antithesis of a grateful heart. Now, this does not mean we have to be positive about every circumstance we go through. This doesn't mean we smile through every struggle. We don't have to ignore the hard realities of life. See, the truth is that the Israelites were going through some very difficult and very real circumstances. But the answer was not to grumble, but the answer also was not to just ignore what they were facing. The answer is found in something I think has become a lost art. It's something we see beautifully modeled in the Bible. It's something called lamenting. This isn't a word we use often in the English language, but it's a biblical way to handle circumstances and process our emotions. Since this is not a commonly used word, let me give you a definition I came up with. To lament is to live in the tension of a difficult circumstance and trusting in God's sovereignty. It's balancing the line, recognizing that life is difficult and life is hard and there's some pain in life, while also recognizing that God is good and God is sovereign. So for the rest of the morning, I want to show you what it looks like using a lament that we find in the Bible. We'll look at a few components of a lament and talk about how it's different than grumbling or just complaining. And At the end, we'll tie it all back to the theme of our series, gratitude. So a great place to find examples of laments is in the Psalms. About 70% of the Psalms in the Bible are laments. And the one I want to use as an example today is a short one. It's Psalm chapter 13. It's only 6 verses long. And we'll read through the whole psalm and then pull out some components of a lament, some things that we could do and we can apply to our lives. So starting in verse 1, David starts out. He says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" So the first component of a lament is this, is to go to God or to turn to God. The difference between a grumble or a complaint and a lament is who we're going to. I know we've talked about this extensively when we've done series on prayer, but just as a reminder, you can go to God about anything and everything. Look at what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 4. He says, "Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything." Here's what happens. See, if we don't pour out our emotions to God, we end up spilling them out somewhere else. And it's usually in the form of complaining or grumbling. I'm going to pick on my parents for a second. So Mom and Dad, I know you're watching at the NT campus. If you could just, Pastor Jeanette, if you could escort them out of the sanctuary for a moment. Just kidding. I'm actually going to pick on anyone who's over the age of 50. Every once in a while, my parents will send me a text message asking me a question about how to do something on their phone. For example, they might send me a text message like, "Hey, how do I change the font size on my phone? Like, how do I make the font bigger?" Because they're over 50. Sorry. It's true, though. And I always laugh because, they're asking me a question, and all I do is I copy and paste their question into Google, find the answer, then copy and paste the answer back to my parents. And I'm happy to do it, but sometimes I wonder, why don't you just ask Google, cut out the middleman. You'll get the answer quicker. You'll get it faster. I think that's one of the differences in our generations is if you're under 50, you go right to Google. If you're over 50, you go right to someone who's younger than you. But think about it for a moment. How often do we turn in the wrong direction when dealing with something? We air our grievances on Facebook. We vent to an unhelpful friend. So one of the big differences between grumbling and lamenting is the direction in which we do it. Now I'm not saying we never talk about our emotions or our circumstances with other people. In fact, we should talk about those things with other people. That's healthy. But if we go to God with our emotions first, I'm just telling you, it will affect how we talk to other people. It will affect how we talk about those circumstances. So the first thing David did is he turned to God. The second thing is to bring your circumstances. He continues in verse 2. He says, "How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?" Now, we don't know the specific circumstances David was dealing with when he wrote this, but he's obviously going through something. If you say these words to a therapist, they would probably say that you're depressed. Maybe he's going through a loss. Maybe he's on the brink of war. Maybe it's a relational issue. Maybe his favorite football team just lost to the New York Jets. Too soon? Probably a little too soon. Whatever is going on in David's heart, David turned to God and he wasn't afraid to bring his circumstances. I think this one can be hard for us. I know for me, I tend to compare my circumstances to other people's circumstances. Even on my hardest day, it's not hard to find someone who's had a tougher day. If I'm sick, there's always someone else who is sicker. If I can't sleep for a night, there's always someone else who can't sleep for a week. If my car breaks down, someone got into a car accident. If I have one leg cut off, someone lost 2 legs at some point. Now, obviously, those are extreme examples. But sometimes I really feel silly bringing my circumstances to God, as if he's too busy for my petty problems, as if I'm wasting his time. Let me just be very clear to you. God wants you to come to him with the big things and with the small things. If you're going through it, he wants to be a part of it. I don't care if you break your back or if you get a hangnail. If it's important to you, it's important to him. So David, he turned to God. He made his he brought his circumstances. The third one is this: make your request. He continues in verses 3 and 4. He says to God, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and my enemy will say, I've overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." See, anytime we ask God for help, we are taking a step of faith. Last year, I bought these. I have too much stuff in my pockets. Guys don't carry purses, so we stuff everything in our pockets. I bought these valve stem covers for my car. I bought them on Amazon. They were $3. I have no idea why I bought them because I didn't need them, but I thought these little red valve stem caps would look cool. And I put them on my car last year, and in the middle of winter, you know how when the temperature drops, your tire pressure can drop as well? Well, the light comes on my dash indicating that my tire pressure was low. And so no big deal. Again, that happens all the time. So I pull into the garage, turn my air compressor on, and I go to take these things off, and they will not budge. Like, these are metal, and the metal of these sees the metal of my valve stems. So I couldn't remove them. I had a vice grip. You could put a ratchet thing on here. So I'm like trying everything I could to get these off, and they would not budge. So for almost a year, I drove with my tire pressure like 10 PSI too low. Not an ideal situation. But finally, I called a friend for help. I called a friend who's a mechanic, and I called him because he deals with this stuff on a regular basis. He's removed C's valve stem caps before. I didn't call an accountant. I didn't call a plumber. I didn't call a doctor. I called my friend who was a mechanic because he's done this stuff before. I was placing my faith in the fact that he could do this without making it worse. I was placing my faith in his ability. And after, again, I tried to remove these for a while. He removed them in about 5 minutes. I don't know how he did it, but he did. And then he sent me a $78 bill. Just kidding. He didn't do that. But when we're going through something, we have a friend in Jesus that we can always call on, a friend who is always the right person. He's the creator of the universe. If we're going through something in our mind, he created our minds. He created our brains. So we turn to God. We bring our circumstances. We make our requests. And then the fourth one is this: we choose to trust. He continues in verse 5. David says, "But I trust in your unfailing love." After bringing his request to God, he says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation." This is maybe the biggest difference between grumbling and lamenting. This is where the Israelites went wrong when they were grumbling to Moses and to God, is the Israelites failed to trust God, which is mind-boggling to me because, again, God had already given them 1,000 reasons to trust him. He came through for the Israelites over and over and over again, yet they were ready to go back to Egypt and trust the slave owners rather than they were to trust God who had provided for them again and again. See, trusting God is the biggest difference between grumbling and lamenting. Trusting God should always be the destination of our laments. So he turned to God, brought his circumstances, made the request, choose to trust. And the fifth one and the final one is to remember the goodness of God. He ends the chapter with this: "I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." David goes from despair to worship in about 3 verses. So this is where I want to connect this to gratitude. We talked about the Israelites earlier and some of the amazing miracles that God had done for them. Maybe the most spectacular one he did for them was when God parted the Red Sea. This is the type of miracle that you just realize this is more than coincidence. This is more than good luck. Something supernatural is happening. He parts the Red Sea and he allows the Israelites to cross. And as soon as they get across, the Egyptian army begins to follow them across the parted Red Sea. And as soon as they're in the sea, God brings the sea back together and the entire army perishes. Imagine God performing this miracle right in front of your eyes. Imagine him just doing something so spectacular right in front of your eyes. And maybe he has done something so spectacular. Maybe for you, he's healed you or someone you love from cancer. Maybe he saved a marriage you thought for sure was over. Maybe he helped you overcome an addiction. When we witness a miracle, we trust. Our faith is enormous when we witness something like this. And for Israel, it was no different. Look at this in Exodus chapter 14. It says, "And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant." You ever pray a prayer like, God, if you just could pull this off for me, I will never not trust you again. I've prayed that prayer so many times, but I don't hold up my end of the bargain. Why? Because we forget. Look at this. Right after God parts the Red Sea, the next chapter says, "Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What are we to drink?'" 3 days after one of the most amazing miracles imaginable, which was on the heels of some other amazing miracles. 3 days and their trust was already dwindling. And by the way, God does provide water for the Israelites. He does change their circumstances. But it's so easy to think, how is that possible? After everything God has done for you. But I've been there. I've seen God do amazing things in my life, but when the next difficult circumstance comes along, we get so focused on the present that we forget about the past. We forget about the ways that God has come through for us in the past. So how do we make sure this doesn't happen? I think the answer is found in the theme for the series. I think the key is gratitude. When we're intentional about expressing gratitude, it keeps the goodness of God at the forefront of our minds. So this is what I want to encourage you to do starting today, every single one of us, is to begin to write down things you're grateful for. It could be a note on your phone. It could be a notebook. Maybe you get a dry erase marker and you write it on your bathroom mirror. But begin every single day, write down things you're grateful for. We said earlier that grumbling takes the focus off the goodness of God and onto myself, and it makes us more self-centered, where gratitude does the opposite. Gratitude will take the focus off ourselves and onto the goodness of God. Even if you're not a Christian, you should do this. There are so many studies that show the benefits of a gratitude journal. It can have on your mental and your physical health. It'll do things like eliminate toxic emotions and reduce physical pain, improve sleep, help regulate stress, reduce anxiety and depression. There's so many reasons we should do this, but if you're a Christian, this is a way that we can honor and glorify and worship God. This can prevent us from the sin of grumbling. This can bring us more peace and more joy and make us more like Jesus. The bottom line of the message today is the antidote to grumbling is aggressive gratitude. So several years ago, I got in the habit of doing this. Every single day, I would write down 3 things that I was grateful for. Either in the beginning of the day or right before I go to bed, I would write down 3 things I was grateful for. And it made such a difference in my attitude. It made such a difference on my perspective. But over the years, I've gotten less and less consistent with it. So this past week, as God normally does when I'm preaching about something, he reminds me of ways that I can improve in my own life. And so I bought a new journal, and literally all I will write in this journal are things that I'm grateful for. And every day since getting this, I've written down at least 3 things that I'm grateful. Some days they're big things like my wife or air in my lungs or just the ability that I'm alive today. Other days it's small things like a hot water tank and heat in the house. But every day when I express gratitude and I focus on things that I'm grateful for, it changes my perspective. It changes my attitude. One thing it's never done is it's never changed my circumstances, but it's changed my perspective, and again, it's changed my attitude. So some next steps for us to think about how to apply this message today. One is memorize Psalm 13:5. The second one, again, I want to encourage every single one of us to do this. Do this just for 1 week. Make a commitment for 7 days and watch how it affects your life. Start a gratitude journal. Bring a friend to church next Sunday, and then send a Thanksgiving blessing to someone. Pastor Rick and your campus pastor will explain that more in detail in just a moment. But would you pray with me? Father, I thank you so much just for who you are. I thank you that you provide a way for us to process our emotions with you in a healthy way. God, I pray for all of us that are dealing with difficult circumstances, that we would be able to apply this idea of lamenting, where we bring our circumstances, we bring our honesty, but by the end of it, God, that we can just find trust in you and remember your goodness. God, I thank you for everything you've provided for us. As we enter the season of Thanksgiving, let us never forget to express thanks to you, to express thanks to others. God, we have so much that you've blessed us with. And it's in Jesus' name we pray.